Why has the number of trans people shot up? I know, I agree with you that it seemed to have always been trans people to an extent. Why has the number shot up in recent years?
For the same reason that more and more people came out as gay after, the early campaigns to challenge prejudice and discrimination.
But it's been legal to be a trans person for years, and no one was stopping them from getting off with other people or marrying other people.
Hang on, the Gender Reassignment Act, or the Gender Recognition Act, was in 2004. Mm-hmm. That's not that long ago.
Sure, but what I mean is that gay people couldn't come out because they would be arrested, right? They would be and shunned and all of those things.
Yeah.
There was more support for trans people before the policy started to change. People seem pretty okay with it. And I've spoken, totally anecdotal, but to many, many women who say they used to have trans people in their bathrooms all the time and they didn't really mind. As you say, it's for the most part not really an issue. It became an issue when policies were being changed and people saw laws being changed around them that took away rights from women. So I just think, as you say, more research needs to be done, but that has to be done first before.
Going back to the numbers issue, people used to say in the 1980s, or even before the 1970s, gosh, there's a huge explosion of gay people. Where have they all come from? It's a social contagion. It wasn't true then. It's not true with trans people now. Because there's more openness about these issues, because there is more support, more people are realizing that they're trans and are seeking treatment.
But there was more support for trans people 10, 15 years ago than there is now. Support for trans people has significantly gone down as a result of what I'm talking about, but still more and more people are coming out. So the social contagion is still going on.
Yeah, because there's a support network, and there are places, organizations that provide affirmation and support. So although perhaps public opinion may have shifted, although I'm not too sure by how much, I think that's very questionable, still most trans people feel that they're recognizing who they are, and that is why more of them are coming out.
It is possible, of course, and I know you're not saying it's not, that people were wrong about it being a social contagion with regards to gay people, and they might be right about it this time.
Well, that is possible, but it's of the young trans people that I've met, and I've met a lot over the years, they all seem very sure and confident in who they are. They often say they're put through all kinds of quite aggressive counter interrogation. What they described was actually just counseling, but they called it an interrogation.
Sure.
But they were subjected to quite aggressive and quite high pressure to not be trans or to question their trans identity. But that is who they are. And they feel happy and content that they were not always content, but they acknowledged they were challenged, but the challenge did not dissuade them from the fact that they identify as trans.
I think if it's not a social contagion, okay, with gay people, we had a lot of older people, it wasn't just young people, older people who were then finally able to come out the closet, which is a wonderful thing. We don't have so many, unless I'm mistaken, older women. There are a lot of young girls doing this, but we don't have many 40 to 70-year-old women going, gosh, finally I can be my authentic self because that's what's inside me. That's one of the reasons I feel like it is a social contagion. Do you see what I'm saying?
Or it could just be that the new younger generation feel there's a space and acceptance where they can be who they believe they are.
But surely now, with all the pride flags all over the place, apart from corporations' Middle Eastern versions of their accounts, but on the Twitter accounts in the UK and the US, all the pride stuff, which, by the way, winds me up. I'm sure it winds you up as well, that they're brave enough to put the pride colours everywhere, except for in places where it's actually needed. But that's a whole other issue. It's a perfect time for women 40 to 70 years old to say, hey, just as the men are doing. And that is why some people think with the men, the older men, a lot of it is to do with autogynephilia. And again, I think there's a space for kinks. I'm not a kink shamer. I'm not some Stasi pornography, whatever. I don't, but that space is not in the Giggle app. That's my issue.
Well, there are more middle-aged and older people coming out as trans. They're not to the same extent or the same profile as younger people, because the controversy is around, how young people are treated with regard to puberty blockers, hormones, and gender reassignment. So it's just that the focus is on younger people, and an understandable concern that young people are vulnerable and they need to be protected from pressure or anything that may push them to be trans when they're not. But that is not the way in which the majority of trans people are and act. Those young people, are clearly very confident in who they are and very affirmative about their gender identity. And I don't think they could be that way if they were being pushed into it or pressured into it, or if it was some kind of social contagion.
I agree with the first two if they were being pushed into it, but if it's a social contagion, I think people can very much get carried away. I mean, we see that in cults, which I think some of the trans aspects are quite cultish, but we see that in Scientology, we see that in Jehovah's Witnesses. These are not people who go into it miserably. They go in...
But why would someone want to join a social contagion knowing that trans people suffer disproportionate levels of prejudice, discrimination, and hate crime? That doesn't make sense.
But as well as I do, that while that is true on one level, on another level, it does give you prestige points among your peers at school. There is some level of that. It obviously depends what school and group you're in.
I've never heard any young person say I've got, or imply they've got brownie points or prestige or kudos because they're trans.
But social contagion doesn't only work that way as well. It can also work in a way that, for example, somebody feels they have, like I saw with The Exorcist, they have OCD, they have bulimia, they have all of these problems, and they're hearing about this wonderful miracle cure. Right? That's not everybody's case, but in many people's case, that's what's happening. Oh, I can just stop all this puberty. I can stop becoming an adult. I can change it in a heartbeat. So, of course, those people would sign up to it willingly, be extremely excited, as my Exorcist patients were, and only 5-10 years later come to think, oh gosh, what have I done? Now, I don't believe many of those people would then necessarily come forward and make a complaint and say, oh, look what you've done. It's embarrassing. If that was the case, that's why I don't think it's easy to follow this. And also you could say on the other side that many trans people are suffering with a lot of things and a lot of abuse anyway, so they might not be happy in the future, 10 years down the line, even if becoming trans was the right thing for them. What I'm trying to say is I think it's very difficult to gather data on how well it's doing. But I fundamentally reject the idea of gender identity. I don't think someone can be an insight. I don't know where that, I don't know.
As I said, you're manifesting your own gender identity right now. You're dressing as a man, you're deporting as a man because you identify as a man.
Yeah, but
that's your gender identity.
If I wanted to dress as a woman, then I would just dress as a woman, but I would never go around saying I am a woman.
Yeah, but you're not dressing as a woman. You're dressing as a man because you see yourself as a man. Your gender identity is male.
I'm not that bothered by clothes. I just sort of pop it on because it's expected of me. Do you know what I mean?
You're a gender conformist.
I think in many respects I am, and in others I'm not. As I was saying before, I think I'm certainly not. I never fitted in. I never felt I fitted in with like the blokes, and maybe you can even feel that sitting with me. I don't know. I'd like to think that. I didn't want to be a blokey bloke. And I was tall. I hated being tall because the tall guys in all the movies were the idiots and the short guys were the guys with the master plan. So I didn't want to be this big guy. And I sort of, okay, I'll sort of be in stereotypically feminine in that sense. But none of this could ever make me. I want a world where if I did want to wear women's clothes, I wouldn't have to say, but I am a woman.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we're dealing with the here and now. I look at all the trans critics. They manifest their gender identity, even though they deny it. You can see it in the way they dress, talk, move, everything. And that's fine. I'm not complaining, but I just don't like the fact they're denying a gender identity that they clearly have.
There's a difference between exhibiting a gender identity and just adhering to the societal norms that are expected of you. You're a man, you wear these clothes. It doesn't mean I have an identity.
Okay. Well, look, trans men and women, as I said, come in all shapes and sizes, all kinds of personalities. And so on. We can't generalize. There's a range of diversity, just as there is amongst cisgender and biological men and women. There's lots of manifestations. People manifest differently, whatever their sexual orientation, whatever their gender identity. I just don't like the way in which trans people are so problematized, seen as a problem.
But they weren't until they wanted access to women's spaces. That's when that changed. Not to say there weren't horrible, the same people who were homophobic, who hated trans people before that, and those people still exist. But when we're talking about the majority of people, I'd like to think, I don't have statistics for this, are very welcoming of trans people, liked all the Moulin Rouge stuff as well, and all of the RuPaul's Drag Race, extremely popular. All of that kind of different gender practicing, experimenting, we were quite into that until laws for women were beginning to become eradicated. And this happened, and I don't want to go conspiratorial, but this really came into play right after the Me Too movement. So it felt for a lot of women like just at this point we were about to reach parity, finally have the same kind of standing as men have. All of a sudden, men are now saying, oh no, but I can be a woman. It's like, well, you don't know what it is to be a woman. You don't have periods. You don't know what it is to give birth. And I know not all women do, but those are fundamental aspects of womanhood that men can't know.
Yeah, but let's look at it this way. Trans women and trans men have all kinds of obstacles to go through in their lives. Obstacles in terms of prejudice, discrimination, hate crime, ostracism, rejection. No one's going to choose that freely.
No.
They're not going to sit down and say, I want to be trans, knowing all these negative things.
No, well, no one chooses to be anorexic.
Yeah. Well, they've made that decision based on some deep-seated feeling, which does seem to be linked to genetics, based on the twin studies, and on also brain structures based on those university studies. That's the way it appears to be. I don't think we should be in the business of creating further pressures on trans men and women, if you can avoid it. Now, there is an issue about women's only spaces, and I agree. But again, I've said, there is an instance or an example or occasion when it may be right to exclude a trans person if they've had a history of physical or sexual violence against women. Totally agree with that. But otherwise, I think it should always be on an individual assessment. Blanket discrimination is not a good thing.
How much space? No, but it's not discrimination. I don't think it is discrimination because, as I don't want to go in circles, of course, but I don't believe it's discrimination because I don't believe they had those rights or should have had those rights in the first place. I don't have a right to enter a woman's space. That is not discrimination. A man who says that he is a woman or believes he is a woman, I don't believe that these are people who are malicious, mostly who are saying, I'm going to pretend I'm a woman. They believe they are women, just as anorexic people believe that they are overweight and they're not. And they need us to stop enabling them, enabling these, what I consider are delusions. And I know that's a really...
But you just said that they had genuine feelings.
What's that? They have genuine feelings.
Yeah.
But feelings, I don't want to sound like Ben Shapiro, but are not facts. They feel that they are women. Yeah. That's what I mean. They're not lying to us, but I think they are deluded.
Yeah.
And I think they need the adults in the room. And I know this is a problem because this is so similar to what was said to gay people. That is a huge problem. And I wonder how much space there is in your mind to consider that because this sounds so similar to what was happening wrongly to gay people, that it's maybe made you go this way with trans and that you might be wrong about it.
No, I think that they are different, but there are lots of parallels with the negatives heaped upon gay people and the negatives heaped upon trans people today. And, I just wish that people would pay more respect and understanding for the plight of trans people and not go down the road of blanket exclusions, go down the road of individual assessment. That's the better way to go. And of course, as I said, we need more research, undoubtedly.
How much space is there in your mind to the idea that there isn't such a thing, that you might be wrong about this?
Well, on the basis of all the evidence I've seen, I believe that there are fundamental differences between, for example, biological women and trans women, to use those phrases, and that trans women's feelings are genuine. And it's not just a feeling, it's a whole identity which governs their thinking and behavior. And that is their right. In a free, liberal, open society, people have a right to be different.
Without going into other people's spaces, I think. That's where we disagree, isn't it?
Yeah.
We won't...
Well, as I said, individual assessment. I'm not saying that no trans person should ever be excluded. What I'm saying is individual assessment. So, as I said, those trans women who have a history of physical or sexual violence against women have no space, have no place in any woman's space. But the vast majority of trans women treat other women with incredible respect.
I agree.
They fit in. Most people don't even know they're trans because they pass so well.
I agree.
They're not a threat to women in any way.
Although I'm concerned for both sides about the passing thing, because on both sides you have some people on the sort of trans rights activist side saying with regards to passing, but look, she looks like a woman. Something about Miriam, that old TV show. Miriam killed her or himself, but was they were all going for the Bachelor kind of reality show because Miriam passed. And to me, that's irrelevant. It's not about passing. And then on my side of this, the gender realists or the gender critics, as you say, they will put up photos of people who don't pass and mock them. And I think that's very cruel and unnecessary. And it's irrelevant because it doesn't matter if they look right or not. The fact is, these are, in my opinion, these are not women, essentially. And they shouldn't be given those extra rights that other men don't have to go into. Where you see discrimination against them in a ban, I'm saying they've been given extra rights they shouldn't have had in the first place.
Well, but your option is that trans women should have to go into men's toilets and therefore put themselves at risk. I don't agree with that.
It seems like we're in a really complex situation where either the women will have to feel at risk or the trans women, who is a much smaller percentage, will have to feel at risk.
But most women in women's toilets don't feel at risk because trans people have been going into women's toilets for decades without a problem.
But many do.
And the big danger is, as I said, if you take this rule that it's all down to biological sex, to chromosomes, that trans men are going to go into women's toilets, just imagine how threatened women are going to feel if you pursue that policy, which is the logical conclusion of what you're saying.
Say that again.
The logical conclusion of what you're saying, if biological sex must govern who has access to what spaces, it means that trans women, it means that trans men must use women's toilets. And that will put women using those toilets in great fear and anxiety and distress.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to the trans man question is. I think that's a really interesting one that you bring up. But it doesn't change. I mean, I think in both cases, the fact is that women, part of the reason that a lot of young women go through the trans issue, a lot of women I've spoken to anyway, they go through it in the first place, is because they are so tired of being ogled by men and sexualized by men. So either way, they do not want men in their toilets. Most of them don't believe, at least as far as I know, in gender identity as a separate thing from sex. As far as I know, you'll know the history better than I will, but gender was simply a synonym for sex for people who were too prudish to use the word sex. It was also used in language, German, French, whatever. And it was only since John Money, who obviously, and I don't mean to use him as a card of, so therefore everybody's horrible in experiments on children, but he was one example, of course. And that's where gender identity started to be used as a separate thing. So I simply don't believe in it. I reject the...
Hang on, gender identity was being used way back in the 1890s, if not before.
Right, go on.
Yeah, Magnus Hirschfeld at the Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin, his work in the 1890s was a lot about trans people and gender identity. And, he was a great pioneer and he helped many, many trans people, mostly trans women, fulfill their dreams of gender reassignment. And he saw a close correlation between the LGB campaign and the trans campaign, in the question that both were, both sides were gender nonconformists.
Interesting. I wish it had gone. I wish they were done as separate things, because I see what you're saying, that they're two gender nonconformists. But really, to me and to people I've spoken to anyway, the LGB issue was about civil rights, to be able to have the same rights as everyone else. The T seems to be asking for a right in a very special circumstance that others don't have. Another man doesn't have the right to go into women's spaces. So that's a separate issue to me.